Hey everyone, it's Andrew, and I'm back with part 5 of the Start to Finish Hybrid 2.0 series. Here we're going to be doing the inner details and a prong setting for a 3mm Montana sapphire into the top part of this pendant. So starting off, we're going to be utilizing two lengths of 20 gauge square wire. You can use 21 if you want to, or you could use a variety of 20 for the outer wire and then 21 for the inner swirl if you wanted to, but that's up to you. I'm using two lengths of 20 gauge wire just because that's what I had on hand for this day. Tucking those tips into the frame, we're attaching these two wires, and then we're going to start building the swirl, starting with the first wire, and then I always like to build the outer swirl before I add my inner wire, just so that way I can add the inner wire to the inside of the swirl so it continues to curve on the inside of this first wire. So here I am shaping the curve for the top part of this swirl. Some minute details just needed to be pushed in a little bit there. These curved or the rounded pliers are really great for getting a nice swirl in your square wires because you can bend the wire around that rounded tip. Once you have your adjustments made and you're ready to attach your second wire, just feed that wire through the loop that you've just formed into the back, and then find a good tie-down point and secure it to your frame. Once you have that wire secured, you're ready to curve that wire and form your secondary swirl. This is going to be a spiral weave detail. If you've been following the channel for a long time, you're probably pretty familiar with this technique, but I'm going to go over with it again in this video. We're going to start by securing the outer wire with the 30 gauge, and I like to go once or twice around that 30 gauge, and then I feed it in an X-weave pattern. What I mean by X-weave is if I'm coming from underneath one wire, I then go over the next. So I'm going over that innermost wire, securing it once around that wire, then coming back out to the outermost wire. Now with the outermost wire, we have more surface area to cover in this swirl than the innermost wire. So what we're going to do is do more wraps around the outermost wire with our detailing wire than we are going to do on the innermost because we have more surface area to cover. So we're going once around the innermost wire, and then I'm doing a progression of 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 times around on this outermost swirl, and then progressing. I only like to go up to like 6 or 7 or 8. Depending on if I'm going to be adding detailing wires into the weave or not. But yeah, I like to keep this a nice tight progression. That's why I don't like to go beyond much more than 8. Sometimes I've done 9. But basically you're going to build up that swirl, that weave pattern, until you've got it to the point that you want it to, and then clip off the extra parts of your wires. We're going to then turn in the post here and feed that through to the back. And then once you've got your 21 gauge, or this is 21 gauge square on my design, whichever gauge you used, once you've got that fed through to the back, you can find a nice tie-down post, clip off any extra that you don't need, and then wrap that wire 2 or 3 times around the post so that way it's nice and secure. If you want to see a more in-depth tutorial on that spiral weave detail, you can search up spiral weave detail in the search bar for the posts on this channel and you will find it. I've done a couple of different videos on it, so you should be able to find something. Here I'm building a prong setting for this 3mm Montana sapphire. So what we're going to start off with is a length of 24 gauge round wire. You can use 26 if you prefer. If you have a large enough faceted stone, you could even use 20, but 24 is kind of the largest I like to go for these smaller faceted stones. So as you see, I made a little prong there. I just bent it at 90 degrees and then folded it all the way down so that way those two wires were horizontal. I pinch it together to make that little point, and then I use my needle nose pliers to bend those two wires underneath to form that prong. The two wires that come underneath then split open to create a little seat for the stone, as you just saw me example there. And then as I'm kind of eyeballing where my next prongs are, it's hard to form these with the stone in it. I don't want to scratch the stone or anything like that. And so I just want to keep it all nice and secure and keep the stone nice and lustrous so I don't have to repolish it. So here I'm forming the second prong. I like to keep them as even as I can. I'm trying to bend them in just a little bit. You want to make sure just only like 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters is facing over the stone, as little as possible. 1 millimeter is probably going to be like your shortest amount that you want to do with these wire prong settings, just to make sure everything is nice and secure in there. So I'm forming one of my wires down as I pull one of my wires across to make a triangular pattern there that the stone can set in the middle of. With that wire that has gone across and is now part of that triangular pattern, that wire will come up and form our third prong. Just kind of giving it some minute adjustments to form that second prong. So as you can see that wire sticking out of the side, that will come up to form our third prong. We're going to just bend that up at 90 degrees. Pull it into the stone, and then kind of get a good eye for where I want to bend that prong at. As I've got it slightly formed, then I'll pull the stone out, forming that prong a little bit more, and then I'll bend it over the stone, and as that wire sticks out, I'll take the stone out and then fold that wire back under, holding the prong with my pliers. Once that prong is formed fully and the wire is folded back under, I like to pull that wire very flush and tight against the other wire that we folded down to make our post, and then I'm going to pull that across and tighten it to make a little screw tightening kind of mechanism here. And I'm going to use both of these wires to attach this to the frame. I'm not going to clip off the extra of, either one of these just yet. That little twist thing down there really secures this all together and also gives you a little bit of a, step that holds the stone up a little bit in your frame, so that way you can have detailing wires around this prong setting. So you can have, like a weave or a coil wrapped around it, and that little post will help hold it up at the appropriate level for the rest of your detailing, so it's not like sunken down or anything like that. Just adjusting those prongs. You don't want to be too aggressive with this point because, again, you could scratch your stone. This is a sapphire. It's not, impervious like a diamond. And once you've got things where you feel it's nice and secure, I'll go around these for a while and just form those prongs and try to pull the prongs out as much as I can and just secure the wire around the stone as much as possible, so that way I feel very confident that it's not going to go anywhere. 3 prongs is about the least I would do on this type of stone setting. I wouldn't do 2. You can build up to 4, or even if you need to do 5 or 6 on a larger faceted stone, that is definitely possible with the same technique. So as we feed those 2 wires through to the back, going to find some good tie down points for them. You might need to adjust a little bit just to make sure everything sits where you want it to. Starting to look nice and flush with the details, so I'm going to pull those wires back, clip off the extra now, and then tie those down to the frame. I've already bent down my bottom swirl from this length of 20 gauge wire that is left over from our spiral weave detail. Now I'm going to attach another length of wire. I'm using 20 gauge for this as well, and then I'll use a 21 gauge for the inner swirl on this detailing. I'm going to feed that wire through to the back and then form another little kind of swirl over the stone to form another little kind of prong stone setting, but this is mostly for a detailing. The stone's already very secure. This is mostly just for aesthetic purposes. And as I get everything lined up with that swirl, I'm going to then bring my other length of wire through. This is a 30 gauge round, and I'm going to use this to build a little kind of reverse spiral weave detail in this top part leading up to the stone. So I'm doing once around that little part, then 3 times around the top, X weave over to the other part, once around the little part, twice around the top, down to the little part, once around that, up to the top, and then once around that to create a little reverse spiral weave detail. Now I'm going to continue down the innermost length of 20 gauge wire, and then I'm going to connect this to the inner part. Here, once I get about halfway down, going to do a little bit of a X pattern over to connect twice around that outermost wire, and then continue on down this length. I'm going to curve these both onto the inside of this piece, and then just swirl that around, connecting it twice around that outermost and then back to the innermost wire. And then just doing a couple of different weave details here. This is where you can get creative. I've gone over to the outermost wire and I'm swirling around that portion now, pulling this wire down to the bottom so that way I can connect it to the frame, clipping off the tips, and I'm turning those to this innermost half-round wire that's curved back to the frame. I'm going to connect these square wires down to this half-round wire on its curve here. So as I feed that wire through the loop, I'm going to be gentle and curve it around. I'm being gentle so that way I don't damage any of the 30 gauge detailing that's done on that innermost weave swirl that we've done that's coming out of the pendant on this side. So after you've connected one wire, you're ready to swerve in that other wire and connect it wrapping around the same bend. I don't think I'm actually going to do one more wire on the innermost detailing. I kind of like how you can see the corner of the stone in that swirl on that right side. So now we're going to do a similar style of detailing on the left side of the pendant. This is utilizing a 20 gauge square wire, and then I'm going to do a 21 gauge on the inside of this one. And I actually will do it this time. Turning in the tips just to make sure everything is pointed inwards into the frame and into the detailing, so that way none of those harsh tips are pointed outwards. You want everything to be smooth and flush on the back, and we'll also take care of the rest of like the tool marks that are on the back of this piece during the polishing portion of this tutorial, which will be the next video. So after that wire is secure, we're ready to form our swirl. A natural swirl is always better than a forced swirl, so just try and spin that wire around and get a swirl to start forming, and then, manipulate it to where you need it to sit. And I'm forming that swirl along this outermost swirl of the half-round wire that we've put down on this other side as well. So now you can see how there's kind of like a duplicate mirroring detail on this side. Oh, so I am going to do a 21 gauge on this wire as well. I'm doing 21 gauge inside both of these swirls just to secure the stone a little bit more and just to have a bit more detailing. I'm all about, longevity of the piece, and also, getting as much detail in there as we can. Curving this 30 gauge round wire into the frame, and then I'm going to fold this square wire over that 30 gauge that I just tucked into the frame to help secure the 30 gauge to the frame while creating a tie down point for this 21 gauge square. Swirling that 21 gauge square down this length of the 20 gauge, and then it's going to curve around this swirl detail, and then I'm going to bring it back up into this half round wire that is sitting on the side here, connecting it in a similar fashion as to the other two wires that I have laid down on this half round swirl. Now I've connected another length of 21 gauge square on the innermost portion of the other swirl that we've created on the left side of the pendant. I'm going to connect these together with 30 gauge round to create a similar kind of weave texture on this side as we have on the other side. Feeding that 30 gauge through to the back, we will connect that down to the frame, and then secure this a couple of times around the outermost wire, and then move to the innermost and just create a kind of funky detailing here. You don't have to follow me exactly on this part, but I'm running around the innermost portion for about 1 centimeter, and then I'm going on the outermost portion, connecting them together with a kind of X-weave pattern, and then running down the innermost portion again for about another centimeter, and then I'm going to bring that over to that outermost, or I guess innermost 21 gauge swirl wire, gets a little confusing once you've laid down so many wires on what's inner and what's outer, but here we are finishing off this detailing. We're Xing across between both of these wires to connect them together, and then I'm back on this kind of middle portion of the 20 gauge square wire that makes the outermost swirl. Once you get that detailing down to where you want it to be, I've cut off my extra 30 gauge right at where this wire swirls into the half round detailing, and then I've swirled in my other wire and connected them down to that half round detailing just like we did on the other side. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it gets a little confusing with all the wires going which way. If you're a Patreon member and you want to request a little bit more in-depth tutorial on this, go ahead and message me through Patreon. YouTube, you don't get requests, so haha. Thank you all so much, especially my Patreon members. I really appreciate the support of this channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you got it 6 months after the Patreon members have already seen it, so it's worthwhile to check out. Have a great day, everyone.